I think there's three groups, and I'll label them in my stereotypical way. I think there's the believing church. Okay, I have a brother who lives in Texas, and one of the things he's told me numerous times is in Texas, people don't ask your name, they don't ask where you work, they ask where you go to church. Okay, it's a social thing. It's just part of the culture. And I've actually worked with people from believing churches, and if, for instance, if you have let's say you have a soup kitchen and you're doing something in your community and you go to this church and you say, would you like to help? We wanted to give you the opportunity to, volunteer or whatever. And they say something like, what's your statement of faith? Right? What's your doctrinal statement? Or they'll ask you about the Trinity or whatever, right? That's the believing church is what I'm saying there. They have a filter that they want you to pass the test, and then they're willing to be with you. But if you don't pass that test, then, okay. So you got the believing church. The other side of it is the postmoderns, or what's known as the emergent church. Okay? And I'm usually categorized in that arena, which is fine for most of the discussions, not always. These guys like to talk. They like to theorize. They like to come up with all kinds of ways of thinking about stuff. Okay? These two don't cross very often. You won't find too many people, at least overtly, who are part of a believing church and entertain Brian McLaren books, for instance, just to pick a name out of the air. All right? In fact, for my own walk, we had to move to Idaho to get out of the believing church before I ever would entertain any of these emergent thoughts. Okay, that's just my own personal story. So there's not a lot of crossover between these two. At least, well, I think there's a lot of covert crossover, but we'll talk more about that in a second. All right? Last group, and this one is the most intriguing to me, are the outsiders. And again, I'm using Dave's term because I think it just covers so many things. Dave defines outsiders as people who did not grow up in church and have no desire to go to church. Okay, it's a short definition. But there's two groups of church. There's two groups to me of outsiders, because I'm one of them. Okay, there's the outsiders who just never went to church. Okay, and then there's the outsiders who I call church alumni. Okay, and I don't know where I think Tim Sorens might be the first place I heard this. He said to me one time, actually Tyler was at lunch with us when he said this. He said, that's the largest denomination in the country. Church alumni is the largest denomination in the country. If you think about it, it's, I don't know how you categorize that, but I think it's true. I sat down with my brother and his wife this summer. And Mark grew up, he was 2 years behind me. He grew up through Christianity and Christian school and had a very similar walk to me. Still goes to church because he's in Texas. It's not like he can't, right? But he said something to me really interesting one time. He said, I think I've outgrown the church, and it scares me to say that. And he's just being honest. He wasn't trying to say it arrogantly. He was just saying that's where he was. He was here. Okay? I got my 20th high school reunion thing last summer, and I had no desire to go back and see those people. I'll just be honest. I'm in contact with the ones I like, and I don't want to go back to high school. Okay? Now, maybe that sounds arrogant or whatever. I hope not. But these are two big groups that we have to pay attention to. And the way I think we pay attention to them is this. What if we had a place called the Practicing Church? Okay? Now just think about it as a construct for a second. Not what it would look like, not how would you get a budget for it, not theologically what it means. Let's play with it in your head for a second and think about it. The believing church, okay, is drawn to this because these people are doing something for somebody. Right? And at whatever level we're at, we know we ought to love our neighbor as ourselves. We ought to love our enemy like we love ourselves. It's all part of loving God, right? So they're drawn to that Practicing Church piece, whatever it may look like. Okay? Postmoderns, these are the people who are going to garden together, shop organically together, the whole deal, right? They're not doing a lot for the people around them, though. There's wonderful exceptions, but most of them talk, at least in my experience. If there was a group that was doing something, guess what? They're going to leak into that too. Right? They're going to want to be part of that. This group is the most intriguing to me because I'm one of them. Okay? One of the main reasons I don't go to church is because we talk all the time. We don't do a lot, at least in my experience. Okay? Now, again, that may sound judgmental and whatever. I'm not trying to be, but my experience has been we spend a lot of time talking. And if you actually live outside the church and talk to people on the outside and say, well, what's up with, 8th Avenue, whatever, they'll tell you exactly what's up with that church most of the time. They know exactly what their deal is, right? It's not a marketing problem. It's not an advertising problem. It's that we're talking and we're not doing much. So if I saw a group of people doing something, I'm much more likely to jump in there. Outsiders that have never gone to church, they want to help their neighbor, right? This is one of those sort of, whatever you want to call this, common grace or whatever. They know they ought to be helping somebody next to them. They know. My brother is a good example. He has two kids down the street from him that are economically in a little tougher shape. And they buy clothes for these two kids 2 or 3 times a year. And they make sure that the kids don't know who's buying them the clothes, right? And so then his question to me this summer, which I didn't know how to answer, was, is that tithing? I think so, but don't, you can't go back to your pastor and say, I'm not writing you a check, because I don't know, okay? But that's a practice. You get what I'm saying? And I love this phrase because if the believing church starts to get wiggy, like they can, right? Because, Jeff, you don't understand the same thing about end times. I can say, we're just practicing. I mean, you can actually say, we're just trying to do and be what Jesus wanted us to be. So if you have input to change that, I'd be happy to listen to it, but we're still going to be about doing something for someone or a group of people or whatever. Like I said, postmoderns are going, they've talked this talk. Let's give them a chance to walk this walk. Right? And then both these groups, I think, are already doing something, or they want to, and all they need is the place. Now, what does this look like? I think it can look like anything. Right? I think Todd's groups of 3 is enough is an example of potentially practicing church. I think Rose's group of what they do up at Vineyard and Shoreline, they're practicing. Right? You can actually go up there on an afternoon thing and see kids getting help on their schoolwork and after-school program. I mean, they're doing something. Okay? What I've learned about this group, okay, is that they want to belong first, okay, and believe second. And if we start to unshovel some of the stuff that we've all had unshoveled on us, right? You got to believe this and this and this before we're going to let you in the door. They go somewhere else. They vote with their feet and they do something else, right? And what I find interesting, which I'm not trying to tweak anybody here, but I would venture to say, go back to scriptures and read where Jesus doesn't drop the bomb, right? He doesn't give people the gospel, at least the way I was taught to give it to them, right? He just loves. He asks a lot more questions than he gives answers to. Right? And people come to him and ask really good stuff. And he says, well, let me tell you a story. And they walk away even more tweaked than they were when they asked. You know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute. If you're supposed to dial in, where is that? So this is something that gives me hope. I think this is where it's going to go. I don't know what that will look like. Lots of people, when I have this discussion with them, they say, well, give me the meat on that. I don't know. But it's an interesting construct because then we're not all stuck with, like I was saying with my dad, that big gap. He thinks Christianity is this, I think it's something else.